An overview of homelessness, briefly tell our stories, discuss some of the realities of people experiencing homelessness, a few implications for policymaking, some recommendations, and then have a brief Q&A before we wrap up. And so I'm going to first introduce the definition, well, not introduce it, but talk about the definition of homelessness. It's a pretty extensive definition, so I'm going to cut a little bit out of it. But it comes from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. And it basically states that it's an individual or family who lacks a fixed, regular, and adequate income or adequate nighttime residence, meaning they have a primary nighttime residence that is a public or private place not meant for human habitation, such as a car, park, abandoned building, bus, train station, airport, or camping ground. They're living in a publicly or privately operated shelter, including hotels or motels, congregate shelters, and transitional housing, or they're exiting an institution where they're temporarily residing, such as a dorm, hospital, or correctional institution. It also includes people who will imminently lose their housing, including housing they own or rent, or sharing with others, such as couch surfing, hotels or motels that are not paid for by federal, state, or local dollars, or through court-ordered eviction, and they lack the necessary resources to continue in those places where they are. Also, it can be an individual or family who is fleeing or attempting to flee violence, such as dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or other dangerous or life-threatening conditions in the individual's or family's current housing situation, including where the health and safety of the children are jeopardized, and who have no other residence and lack the resources or support networks to attain other permanent housing. And so those are just some of the, that's just some of the definition of homelessness. According to HUD, it's quite longer, but we have limited time, so we're not gonna go through the entire definition. Now, we've just gone through the definition of it, and homelessness looks very different to what we may believe that homelessness looks like. And so before we really go into that, what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about our issues with homelessness, or some of the things that we experienced, or basically tell our story of how we became homeless, or how we became homeless. And so to start that, I'll start off with my story. My story is that through a few unfortunate events that occurred in my life, I experienced homelessness the winter of 2005, 2006. I left my home. I left everything that was near and dear to me, and found myself in the streets. I had no idea what resources were available. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who to talk to. I had no support system whatsoever. And so I learned quite a lot living in the streets. I learned how to survive. I learned how to eat cheaply, if you will. So I learned how to get my needs met in that environment without any resources, or with very few resources. My saving grace was a job. And if it wasn't for that job, I would not be sitting in front of you today. So that's a little bit about my story. So now let's hear a little bit from Sean Jones, who is one of our panelists. Let's hear a little bit about your story, Sean.
Sure. Thank you, Sanj. I'll give you two brief examples of my story. My first one, my stint of homelessness, ironically happened in 2005 as well. I had recently gone through a divorce, and was still living in the family home, carrying the weight of bills and various needs for two different households now at that point. And long story short, I decided to downsize because unfortunately I was being laid off. My income was being reduced, and decided to transition from the family home to a small apartment. And literally the day I was moving everything out of the home, getting rid of stuff and putting some stuff in storage and transitioning to the apartment complex manager who had been on vacation prior called me 911 saying, "Oh, by the way, while I was away, the person that was in charge didn't do X, Y, and Z, so we can't officially have you move in today." I'm like, "What?" So I was put in a holding pattern essentially, wasn't able to move, literally had to double the space of the storage unit that I had already picked up, and was kind of lost. They had my deposit funds. They were not willing to give those back to me right away. My income was already reduced. So now I started calling around to the various shelters, and the rest is history. And eventually, as Sans explained, income definitely helped me to get back on my feet. I was able to pick up some more work, and that's that. And then fast forwarding to about 5 years ago, I was recruited pretty heavily by an organization out of California, and they transferred me over to their location, paid for the move, the whole 9 yards. I got rid of everything I had in Baltimore, had signed a two year mutual agreement that I would stay with this particular organization. It was a pretty nice salary. They were putting me up for about 4 months in a corporate housing, the whole 9 yards. They were winding in, and at the 11th hour, about 4 months in, the rug got pulled up from under me. California is also an at-will state like Maryland is, and they had no rhyme or reason, but they decided, well, today's your last day. What? Today's my last day. I'm 4 months into a 2 year contract. I'm self-employed technically. You told me not to market my services for my consulting endeavors for at least 6 months. I haven't marketed to anybody. What am I supposed to do? Well, good luck getting back home, Mr. Jones. We brought you out here, but take care. Here's your last check. What? No explanation. And I try to do my research of how to go against this at will employment rug being pulled out from under me. But unfortunately, the executive director at that time of that organization was the previous mayor for a neighboring jurisdiction. Let's just put it that way. So he was a heavy hitter. So going up against the previous mayor of a pretty large community nearby was not going to work. So I was stuck in California for about 30 days, came back to Maryland, and with nothing essentially, no money in my pocket. And I had already pretty much downsized and got rid of everything. I just went to California with a couple suitcases, right? So when I came back, my attitude was, I'm not going to couch surf. I'm not going to do the what was me. I'm not going to move back in with an ex, none of that. I'm going to do what I need to do to survive and regroup. And I'm going to start rebuilding my consulting business that I had to shut down essentially for a while. So long and short of it is, at that particular time, the economy was not doing too well. It was very challenging to market my services, not to market my services, but to actually get a contract. And the competition was high, and opportunities were bleak. So I started doing what I needed to do. I found my way into a shelter eventually, had to move around from shelter to shelter periodically, and did what I had to do. And eventually, again, I was able to get back on my feet due to gainful employment.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. And now we'll hear from Anthony Williams, who will tell us a little bit about his story.
Hi, my name is Anthony Williams, and this story is always hard for me. I was born in Baltimore City. I was in Baltimore City Hospital 3 months. I remember looking up as a baby and seeing a bright light. The second time I remember looking up and a woman's hands was over me. That was my first foster mother. I stayed with her for 8 years. Then my social worker came and got me and took me to another foster home. That was very hard. That was difficult because that was my mom that I thought was my mom. In my heart, that was my mom. And it was very devastating to the point where when they took me to my second foster home, I ran away like 3 different times because they would hit me, they would beat me, they would laugh at me, they would mock me. And I kept running back to her. And the last time I saw her, she gave me a bag of pennies and said, you can come and, stay here on the weekend, but I can't take care of you anymore. When I was 9, when I was 9, she passed away. And her adult children invited me to her wake. And so my experience of homelessness was at age 11. The second time the third time I ran away, and I was on the street, and and someone told me that there was a place called Fellowship of Lights on Calvert Street, and they help people that are runaways. And I went there. I stayed there for 2 weeks, and then I started going from one group home to the other. I started at Fellowship of Lights. Then they moved me to Bethesda, Maryland, to the Baptist Home for Children. And then they moved me back after 6 months to Baltimore, to Boys Home Society, which was next to First Presbyterian Church, a church that Science is part of. It was called the First Presbyterian then, but it's Franklin now. But I lived next to that church for 5 years. And then at the age of 17, I ran away again with a cult religious group. And I traveled the country, organized, and did work with them for over 20 years, basically. I ended up in New York, became homeless again in New York in my 30s, and then struggled and back and forth. So my life has been basically around with, for the first time in my life now, I have a 1-bedroom apartment, which you could probably see I'm in. I got this apartment in 2015 through Healthcare for the Homeless. I've been advocating for years and trying to change the system and basically to get people to give their expertise, like this panel is right now giving to you, on some of the ways people become homeless. And my way was being born into the foster care system, never knowing my parents. And I regret the fact that I have never met my parents, right? And I'm 57 years old. But I made it to a point where I'm happy now in life, and I'm happy with the work that I do around homelessness. So that's my story. That's a story.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anthony. And now we'll hear a little bit from Richard Mayo. Hi, Richard.
Hi, everyone. I'm Richard Mayo. My story is an amalgamation of a series of unfortunate events that started, let's say, with a Republican president going into power. So anyway, I graduated my undergraduate in North Carolina Central University in 2003, May of 2003. And so during that time, the United States Congress had passed a certain law that said, before you hire a foreigner, you have to prove that you couldn't find an equally qualified US citizen. Now, at the height of what had happened with the economic collapse of 2000, or the crash of 2000, a lot of companies, especially in the South, were having issues hiring certain folk. I'll just leave it at that. But mostly what I ended up doing, though, is I ended up going to Georgia, because that's where Black man goes to soar. So I went out there and I started my business with a couple of partners. Since my background was in business, I opened up a tax office. So over the years, I've had nothing but success in what I was doing. However, in 2007, we had the first Black president elected, or were running for president. So what didn't happen, it's all political for me. That's why I am so passionate about advocacy. So what happened is I end up somehow in immigration, of which I came with a bona fide visa. So I'm looking at it like, whoa, overstaying the visa, you classified as this as well? So needless to say, I was kept over there on a non-criminal deportation for close to 3 years. I went in June 2007, and I came out in April 2010. So now imagine I'd lost everything. I had paid my house, my mortgage, everything for a whole entire 6 months to almost a year. thinking that it's a mistake and I'm gonna get out. And so anyway, after that, when I got out, friends were far and in between because we all immigrants. So they're like, whoa, what happened? He came out. He must have told something. So anyway, that's the excuse they gave. But going back to my issue, I then went and I saw this group that was out there, You Hope CDC, that was helping some in my community, in the African community, while I was reaching out to my own Zimbabwean community to get support. So I volunteered I was volunteering as a grant writer for You Hope CDC for quite some time, and then with time passing, I ended up getting employed there, doing their books, their accounting, and all other stuff. So how I ended up getting here is me going back to my own tax business, not having quite a successful year in 2018. And I had to come out here. Well, I chose to, I didn't have to. I chose to get a job. We're doing marble restoration out in Baltimore, Royal Sonesta Hotel up there, and all the inner harbor fancy hotels there. Yes, we did hotel restoration there. You would walk into Royal Sonesta, it looks like the 7-Eleven that's down the street. But then when we were done with it, it looked like the Buckingham Palace. So the person that I came with was subcontracting with someone else because he's a foreigner. So we drove from Georgia, and we ended up working for this lady, Miss Beth Allison Hardy, with BNA.
Sorry to interrupt, Richard. I'm sorry to interrupt. We just our time is running thin, so I have to interrupt and go on to the next slot. I apologize.
No problem. I'll just sum it up by saying, anyway, she ended up shortchanging me, and I ended up getting stuck. So now this is 3 years in. So I got stuck after a job contract in Baltimore, a city that I didn't know no one. There you go.
A great segue. I really appreciate you saying that, telling your story. In fact, Sean, Anthony, and Richard, thank you so much for sharing your story. And Richard's story is a great segue into the realities of people experiencing homelessness. And so there are so many different challenges that people experiencing homelessness encounter. A lot of times we think homelessness is just some person laying on a bench or on the street or begging for money. And that's not always the case. And while you may see that as homeless, as someone experiencing homelessness, what homelessness is also there's women who are experiencing homelessness, and some of the challenges that they face are having their menstruation, their period at that time, each month, and not having anywhere to go, or not having sanitary items to change into, or maybe underclothing to change out of, maybe having access to washing machines or different things like that. Some people experience homelessness and it's not their fault. We saw that here with COVID. Maybe you had the resources to cover, 3 months, and then COVID happened. That's an entire year. Maybe you lost your job during COVID. And so not anticipating that, no one anticipated COVID. And so you prepared for 3 months in case anything happened, but not for an entire year. Or medical expenses, car breaks down. And so while you had money and savings to cover, rent or what have you for a period of time, those large purchases really eat into the savings that you have. And then also people tend to be more transient now than they were in the past. They move to where the opportunities are. So they may move for jobs or move for school and leave behind support systems that they have and try to build new ones. And we all know that takes time. That's not something that occurs quickly. Or not always can you trust. So that takes time to build those relationships. So it could be anybody, somebody sitting next to you at work, could be a friend or an acquaintance who's experiencing homelessness, could be someone who lost their home in a fire or, some type of disaster. Like they're not anticipating a fire occurring when they go to work or when they leave the house and get a phone call and say that their house is burned down. And then students not having some place to go during the winter months or Christmas or holidays. And, the dorms are closed, so they have nowhere to go. So a lot of times these realities happen. And so I want to just take a brief minute to hear from each of our panel members. Sean, we'll start with Sean, some of the realities that he knows or that he may have heard of people experiencing homelessness. Then we'll quickly go through the rest of the panel with Anthony and Richard. So Sean.
Sure, thank you, Sans. So for me, it's ironic because I have a background in logistics and planning and forecasting. And when you're homeless, especially if you don't have a permanent bed somewhere in a shelter or some kind of transitional home or some kind of program, it's literally a logistical nightmare trying to figure out day to day, minute by minute, hour by hour, how are you going to accomplish your 24-hour cycle of eating and sleeping and being safe and being dry if it's raining and being warm if it's cold, and all these different logistics. So for me, I know firsthand when I did not have a permanent bed somewhere at a temporary shelter, going to bed the night before to wake up the next day, you're anxious going to bed, you're nervous getting up, you're trying to plan your plot and plan. You might go to bed hungry that night, but you're like, okay, I'm going to bed hungry tonight, but I'm sure going to get a decent meal in the morning. Where can I go? Where could I go that I qualify to go to? Maybe I'm not the right age to get this meal at this particular service provider. Maybe it's not the right day of the week to go take a shower at a place that has a shower available for you. Maybe I ran out of an allotment of clean clothes. My clothes are smelling kind of funky right now. They're standing up in the corner by themselves. There's a list of things that you have to go through. And as Sans mentioned, it's obviously variations of that, male to female, child, family, single, group, whatever. So for me, the biggest challenge and/or experience of being homeless is the whole planning process, planning to get through your day, through your week, through your minute, through the hour, just to survive. Do I want to be on this particular block at this particular time of the night when I know that maybe this is not the best location to be hanging out at, right? I'm not a big proponent of stealing, but maybe I need to borrow some food from this particular store tonight, right? It's those type of things you go through. I'll be the first to admit your mindset changes. It's the mindset of survival, right? And they're like, well, they're going to throw this thing away anyway, so maybe if I just borrow it. Now there's times where I might go talk to the manager. Hey, I see you have this pizza here. It's about closing time. What are you planning on doing with it? Can I have it? Yeah, sure. Here you go. Right? Sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't. Right? So again, it's just the ad. I'm not trying to promote being dishonest. I'm just saying it's literally you start weighing out your options of should I take this chance to do this thing that I would not normally do so I can survive this thing I'm in called homelessness. And I'll end with that.
Anthony?
Yeah. So, okay. I was a child of Ritalin. It was a drug given to young children in the 70s for attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity. And I was all of that as a child, all the way to adulthood. And I went off of Ritalin. I went off of Dexedrine. So I realized that I had mental health issues. Didn't really learn much about it until I was in my 20s. And then I really wasn't taking any medications. And so my homelessness had become very hard and very depressed to the point where I wouldn't take care of myself. What do I mean by that? Not washing, not taking care of myself mentally, not taking care of myself physically. My mind would be like zzz all the time. And I couldn't really figure out except to kill the pain. So for me, killing the pain was having a drink. Started out with drinking alcohol, liking alcohol. Then I started smoking marijuana. Love marijuana. It settled me down. Then I started um, cocaine, and I really love cocaine because the Ritalin in cocaine had the same effect. It slowed me down. It didn't speed me up, but it slowed me down. And so I enjoyed those drugs as self-medicating. Going into my 30s and my 40s, it got worse. It progressed. And, I also have underlying health conditions, right? Like now, when I was homeless, I was diabetic. I had a mental health problem. And I wasn't addressing any of those issues. And I lived in an abandoned building. So I started writing. But here's the thing. How do you keep your insulin cold? How do you hold on to all of your medications? How do you take care of your mental health when all you have is your depression and the day-to-day life struggles, whether asking, as Sean was mentioning, for money, panhandling, petty larceny. I did a lot of that. I have no shame in saying that because it's all about survival. You go on a 7-Eleven and you pick a sandwich up and just act like and walk out. A lot of people do that. But see, people do not understand a hungry belly. And people don't understand a lost mind. And if I don't take care of my mental health, my mind gets lost. And so I'm able to do that now because I have an apartment. I went to an agency, Healthcare for the Homeless, that addressed my medical issues and helped me get housed. There it is. You see me now. You would never know that. If you would never know what the heck I looked like. When I went to HCH, people would move 3 seats down away from me because I smelled so bad. And you know what my therapist told me? She goes, keep coming back here. Don't stop coming back here. We want to help you. Come back. I said, I don't know, man. I was so messed up. So I'll pass it on to Richard.
Thank you, Anthony. Richard?
Yes, so I had to share every little detail about my life as which led up to this, because as I'm advocating for other people, I'm realizing how common my story is. So I can relate with the Mexicans because they're immigrants and they were going through Trumpism. And then I can relate with certain people who are college educated and don't fit into the certain stereotypes. So I could relate to almost everyone that's homeless. And that's why I wanted to share that. However, when I got here, I was at City Hall heading to the courthouse, trying to file my paperwork to file a small claims claim with Miss Beth Allison. So anyway, I saw a guy with a soda and I said, man, I'll give you $1 for that soda, bro. I'm thirsty. And he was like, oh man, I can't sell it to you, bro. They're giving them for free around the corner over there by the park. They call it Bum Park. So I'm like, what? So I go over there and sure enough, and then all of a sudden I'm connecting and I got people skills. So I'm connecting, able to do and know other things. So the challenge for me was my pride, because as someone that felt like I was accomplished, I did those things that you were supposed to do when chasing the American dream. So how do I end up having the government lock me up, cage me up for no reason? So the mental effects of it, like I've lost 3 years of my life, all of it adds up. So finally, you just looking at it like, okay, I'm gonna self-medicate. So normally it's drinking, but HCH helped me with that, and I went to AA. So those challenges would be just when people say you got a panhandle, bro, we can't help you, and I can't panhandle. And even if I tried, I'll be dressed up a certain way because that's not what homeless people are supposed to look like. But anyway, so with that was my story. So it was mostly my pride and just adapting to new environments at the turn of a dime. A split second, you gotta be in the line over here at Bum Park, scrambling for food. The next minute you're up there trying to get some clothes. Yeah, by Shot Tower. So yeah, that's pretty much all the challenges we face out here.
Thank you so much, Richard. And as you can see, the realities for people experiencing homelessness are vast. And we could go on and on and on and on about the needs and how to have their needs met or what is needed in order to have those needs met. But we only have limited time. So we'll have to now move forward to the implications for policymaking. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Our time is short. We only have another 15 minutes. So we're going to try to wrap these up pretty quickly. So do the policies help or hurt people experiencing homelessness? So as previously mentioned, all of our stories are different. All of us have different needs. So some of these policies look very good in theory, but in reality, they're not effective. I know someone who received housing. I used to see them all the time. They got housing, and then within a short period of time, they were right back where they started from. As we all know, going from unhoused to housed is a step-by-step process. It's not something that's easy to do. And that's just like anything, like with COVID, it was a step-by-step process, learning how to go from being in an office or being in a workplace to being online. And as Richard said, you try to follow the American dream. Society encourages, get a job, get a house, do this and you'll be successful. But here in Maryland, you need almost $30 an hour in order to be able to afford a 2-bedroom home. How do you do that on minimum wage? When minimum wage is $11.75. Even with the proposed $15 minimum, you still would have to work 2 full-time jobs in order to afford that. And so it's not an easy process. Criminalizing homelessness because it's viewed as a problem instead of as people needing help. And then just recently, Los Angeles County and city implemented a home for everyone. So they went through their homeless population and went through Skid Row and said homes for everybody. But what does that look like and how does that work? So we're just going to take a couple minutes. Again, our time is short. So we're going to start this time with Anthony. Anthony, just a couple minutes. Can you talk a little bit about some of the policies, the implications for policy making?
So, yeah. So, it's these definitions that we talk about coming out of HUD: chronically homeless, rapid rehousing, the 10-year plan to end homelessness. All these things came out 20 years ago, all these different definitions of homelessness. And these policies were written by contractors that work for HUD. But these contractors never talked to any homeless person in the street about how to create programs and services for homeless people. As a matter of fact, in Washington, they don't leave their desks. But they get contractors to write policies. Then those policies go to HUD. Then HUD gives those policies to Congress. Then Congress votes on it, and then they throw money at it. That's how it works. And so when they created rapid rehousing for homeless folks, they didn't talk to any homeless folks about rapid rehousing. And so on and on over the years, HUD would lessen and lessen the time people can be housed. The only thing we got left right now, which is great, is the housing choice voucher program that's been around since the 70s. Any other program that they write is cut in half. Not long term, short term. So they're going to they have a policy where they'll take a person off the street and put them in an apartment, market rate housing, for 21 months. And then after 21 months, they should be brought to self-sufficiency, right? No? And I'll leave it at that. That really is like so destructive, a destructive policy and a bad policy. Rapid rehousing, I'm saying it straight out.
So we can talk a little bit about some of the recommendations, but first let's hear a little bit from Richard and then let's hear from Sean so that we're able to cover some of these topics before our time is up. So Richard?
Yes, thank you. So COVID exposed a lot of things. And so one of the things is there were people that were classified as essential workers, and all of a sudden, who's essential? And wait a minute, they were not getting paid. They're not getting $10 an hour. And so not only that, it exposed that the disparities in housing. So what I see happening is we can no longer have that mentality of going pre-COVID, because now we know what's out there and what the issues we have to deal with. So with certain people saying, oh no, it's cheaper for them to, or Christian conservatives saying it's cheaper for people don't want to work right now because they got that stimulus check. We shouldn't give them a stimulus check because it's more money than they earning, because it's incentivizing, people not working. So, but they didn't view it as, no, people weren't getting paid enough, because this money is just for survival. This is the bare minimum that we giving out, or not giving out, but helping people with. So anyway, it's got to do with money, income, as Ms. Sons mentioned, as well as making housing affordable. And so we'll get into the recommendations in a bit, but yeah, that's my piece there.
Sean?
Policy making. Wow, that's the point of my time. Seriously, it's ironic because before my first stint in homelessness, I worked for an agency or an organization out of DC who is essentially the liaison between the federal government and all the several entities throughout the nation that deal with homelessness and homeless programs and housing and so on. I'm not going to name the agency, but the point is we'd have to go on Capitol Hill every year and make our plea to Congress and get our appropriation of funding and right. And we're the liaison again between the feds and their decisions and their policies and all these entities, hundreds throughout the country, and we're their support system, we're their bloodline, so to speak, and how to utilize this funding, let's just say appropriately, the appropriation, right? So I guess my point is that until there's so many policies out there, it's almost like when you're growing up as a child and you're in a household and your mom and your dad or whomever is leading the household is like, these are my rules, you got to obey them or else. Well, great. Who's making up these rules? You could challenge your parents, right? Or not, or you can just abide by the rules. So it's the same thing with the policy making that comes from legislation and the government on down. They make up these rules, and literally, when I say make up, sometimes I think they're literally making them up. I'm a professional writer and a grant writer, and I've written policies. Trust me, I've been in war rooms where we're like, well, what do we put in this section? Let's just let's just cut and paste it from over here and put it over here. Well, it doesn't really apply, right? The point is, it's like a vicious cycle. So I guess my point is policymaking. Policymaking is an interesting dynamic, and policies are definitely, as Anthony mentioned earlier, more times than not, they're made by people that really don't get it at the end of the day. They may be college educated, they may have experience in a particular field, but they don't know the days and the ins and outs of what it's like to deal with this particular area that they're trying to make a policy about. So if that's the case, it's like putting the cart before the horse. So until we can get to a point where policy making is made with a mindset of inclusiveness, so to speak, we're going to just keep going around and around and around and around. That's all I'll say about that.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And so now we'll go into recommendations. So each one of you will have 1 minute to say what your recommendations are. I'll start saying that recognizing that people experiencing homelessness are people who may need help versus a nuisance or a problem that needs to be solved. We just saw this recently in the news where there was a call for tents in one of the parks in the city. And it was like, get rid of the parks. And the person said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to try to help. And so looking at the need, meeting the needs, having a more diverse, so we would love to have had Latinx and more women on this panel, more youth at the table, because we want to hear those voices too, because those are important as well. And the needs are different. And then speaking with people who are experiencing homelessness, just like you've heard our stories today, each of our story is different. And so each of our needs are different. And so just including those voices and having those folks at the table to help with those policies. We'll start with Richard, 1 minute, your recommendations.
I recommend that people look at those that are profiting at shuffling human capital. So we have organizations that are very powerful and influential that always get to these contracts to just maintain homelessness, not to end it. So we gotta have them redefine their mission statement to say ending homelessness should be your mission statement, not all this case management. How are you going to end homelessness? And we should look at Baltimore and go legislatively. We can say, look, we got all these dilapidated homes right outside of Baltimore. A majority of some of them city owned, 10,000 properties, over 10,000, and you got 2,000 homeless people. So added to the federal budget for the infrastructure bill that's going to get passed, and petition and lobby for sensible stuff where it looks and makes sense for everyone. That's a couple.
Sean, 1 minute for you.
Sure, I'll keep it pretty simple, and I'll use an analogy. This is no different than a major corporation or a new corporation or a mom and pop going to the public and saying, hey, we want to put a panel together to test our new thing. We want to get your feedback before we put this movie out into the public. We want to get your feedback and input before we do X, Y, and Z, before we start putting a bunch of money behind it to market it. It's no different. When it comes to the world of homelessness and the various programs and services that are attached to it to hopefully end it very soon, you have to get the voice of the people. Well, what people am I talking about? You have to get the voice of the people that are actually experiencing homelessness. And you can't just target a particular cross-section of that group. It has to be every person that walks the earth, male, female, LGBTQ, the whole nine, tall, short, fat, skinny. So, it doesn't matter. From all walks of life, you have to get input, not you, but policymakers, the legislators, the mayor, the councilmen, the councilwomen, the delegates, the organizers of various campaigns to end homelessness, the nonprofit organizations and for-profit organizations, as Richard mentioned, that are dealing with supporting homelessness and services. You have to get their voice at the table. And I don't just mean like a one day, hey, let's have some lunch and let's have a chat and chew, so to speak. No, they need to be involved. They need to be on the boards. They need to be on the councils. They need to be on the committees and so on to actively participate in changing policy and changing legislation. Simple.
Thank you. Anthony?
So this is what lived experience looked like. You're looking at it right now. This is what lived experience looks like. My first recommendation is that Baltimore has the infrastructure to end homelessness in Baltimore. And we need to be on all levels of the decision-making process to end homelessness in Baltimore. My next recommendation is to the COC. This issue of homelessness is not complicated. It's very simple to solve. And it's very simple to end homelessness in Baltimore. But these bureaucracies and these ways of grant writing and making people jump through these hurdles to end homelessness is ridiculous. And I want the COC to think in these terms, because, you know, you're doing a fundraiser. And the terms that I'm asking is just pause and look at Baltimore. Pause and look at the structures we have. Pause and think about making it simple, not complicated. And we, as the Lived Experience Committee and other homeless folks in Baltimore City, has solutions to end homelessness. We just want you to listen. We don't want to fight you. We don't want to battle with you, right? We want you to just make it simple for a person to get a home. It's that simple.
Thank you, Anthony. So our time is up. I'm not sure if we have time for a question. I do see it's 3:50. So thank you, Sean, Anthony, and Richard. I really appreciate you coming on board. Thank you for attending this panel. For more information on homelessness, you can visit the Journey Home website at journeyhomebaltimore.org.
Thanks for hosting.